Welcome to my world history notes. I'm studying the Cold War and sharing with you things that I've learned, things I already knew, but things that I'm learning, and it's just very relaxing for me. It's a fun pastime to do, and I hope that you'll hear some of the things that I say, and maybe you'll dig into these topics and have your own conclusions, um, which won't be like mine. Might be totally different from the conclusions I draw. So, in any event, we're talking about the Cold War, and I want to start with, Martin Dies, that congressman, Democratic congressman who headed the uh, House Committee about Un-American Activities in the 30s and 40s. He uncovered what he said were upwards of 5,000 communist sympathizers and outright Soviet agents in our government. Some were just questionable and some were definite. Later on, we discovered that many of these, or most of them, were uncovered in things like the Venona Project, and then, of course, the KGB archives when they came available to us. There's several good books about that. I'll be mentioning from time to time, but one of those is important, a person named Harry Dexter White. Now, he was an economist and he was a senior Department of Treasury official. He became the first head of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, played an important role in the formation of the World Bank. And very important. Those agencies are big important agencies that you can see. There's a lot of argument about what they do in the world and how they affect politics and the global climate, economic climate. One of the things that's interesting about Harry Dexter White, he was also a Soviet secret agent. He was the most highly placed asset the Soviets had in the American government, and he subverted American policy to favor Soviet interest over U.S. interest. Unlike people like Alger Hiss or Julius Rosenberg, who we'll discuss, White died before he could be brought to trial. But and so because of that, his case has not been publicly looked at as closely as Hiss and Rosenberg. Um, but White's subversion of U.S. foreign policy was probably more damaging than either of those two guys. So, trained at Columbia, educated at Columbia and Stanford, and then Harvard. So this is a guy with top rank, top rank education. He also studied Russian. Was hoping to get a fellowship to study economic planning in Russia, and so he is accused of what historians say is he was the real author of the Morgenthau Plan to turn Germany into a potato field, quote unquote, which then leaked, united non-Nazis with Nazis, stiffened resistance, and prolonged the war. So he helped prolong the war. Um, he used his position in the Treasury Department to develop a hostile U.S. policy toward Japan. The reason was to distract Japan from their plans to attack the Soviet Union and draw the U.S. into the war as an ally with the Soviet Union. He was the author of the extreme ultimatum that Japan could not comply within days just prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. So he's the one who gave the ultimatum or created the ultimatum that helped make Japan make the decision to attack Pearl Harbor. Of course, they were responsible for what they did, but he was part of the play. He delayed financial support mandated by law to the nationalist Chinese government of Chiang Kai shek, helping to cause the triumph of Mao Zedong's communist Chinese government. And he was instrumental in handing over Allied military mark printing place to the Soviet. This caused a $250 million deficit in the occupational budget paid out by the U.S. Treasury. This, in effect, amounted to the U.S. taxpayer paying the salaries of Soviet occupation troops at a time when the U.S. Soviet relations were deteriorating precisely because of the presence and behavior of Soviet occupation forces in Eastern Europe. And, uh, and this was all done at the behest of the Soviet intelligence framework. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you'll want to pursue on Harry Dexter White, and it's just really a colossal disaster. It just goes to show you that people working at odds against America can be placed highly in our government. Don't think it can happen now with the communist Chinese. So now let's go back to May 8th, 1945. We've been ahead. We've been in 46 and 7, talking about some events. Let's go back to the President Harry Truman's radio broadcast on victory in Europe. And he very interesting. He he said, "This is a solemn but glorious hour. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations," which is what the name for the Allies was. "The flags of freedom fly all over Europe." Well, we know that what will happen as the Soviet Union begins um, to take over its bloc, the Soviet bloc. So one thing he said that I wanted to point out that I thought was very interesting is much remains to be done. The victory won in the West must now be won in the East, which is about Japan. And the whole world must be cleansed of the evil from which half the world has been freed. And I would say the job was only partly done because it took a long time to deliver the world from the Soviet Union. And now we're dealing with globalists and the communist Chinese. So it's just a constant battle against tyranny. And well, just a couple more things I'll go over and I'll stop for today. Um, on June 9th, 1945, an agreement was signed in Belgrade, in which Yugoslavia agreed to evacuate Trieste and allow it to be occupied by an Allied military government until the completing claims to the region were resolved, which of course resulted in the communist takeover. And on June 19th, Spain was denied admission into the United Nations for as long as fascist Francisco Franco, who held power, even though Spain was neutral in World War II, and he would not die for several decades. So this is a kind of important point to make. So we're still talking about the Cold War. We're going to try to move around, look at timelines, and there's some other big events in the 40s that are about the Cold War that are very interesting. And I hope you'll investigate these things and come to your own conclusions. And we left a war that killed 60 million human beings. Um, However, the communist countries, the Soviet Union and communist China, were responsible for, and Cambodia, Vietnam, were responsible for the murder of 110 million people in their own countries in the 20th century. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this. It's just astounding events. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Talk to you later.